Where are we? When we left the planet Skaro, where did you ask the machine to take us to? Think, Doctor.
Ian, you're hurting him.
No, I'm not.
Come here, my boy. Where are we? Where do you live?
This is England, isn't it?
England? No, France.
France?
For 26 years, a blue police box carried audiences through impossible journeys. But behind Doctor Who's whimsical adventures lay a battlefield of egos, scandals, and corporate warfare that nearly destroyed television's most innovative show. What fans never knew was their beloved series survived on secrets, forbidden romances, and executive vendettas. From the chaotic first pilot that had to be refilmed, to brutal cancellation in 1989. This is the untold story of creative genius crushed by politics, toxic relationships that poison sets, and a producer trapped by his own creation. The real monsters weren't aliens. They were the suits in boardrooms.
Please, can't we get out of here?
But the city, I must see the city.
But why?
I would not be questioned.
A show born in crisis. November 23rd, 1963. While the world mourned President Kennedy's assassination, something extraordinary was happening in a BBC studio. Doctor Who was being born, but it was a birth that almost killed the show before it began. The truth is, the first episode was a complete disaster. William Hartnell, the gruff actor chosen to play the mysterious doctor, didn't even want the job. He'd spent years playing military men and criminals, and this weird science fiction show seemed beneath him. On filming day, everything that could go wrong did. The TARDIS doors refused to close properly on camera, sound equipment malfunctioned, and Hartnell fluffed his lines repeatedly. Producer Verity Lambert watched her dream project crumble in real time. But the real crisis came from the show's creator, Sidney Newman. His one absolute rule was no bug-eyed monsters. He wanted Doctor Who to be educational, not another cheap sci-fi serial. When writer Terry Nation pitched the Daleks, Newman was horrified. These metallic creatures were exactly what he'd forbidden. Lambert had to fight tooth and nail to get them on screen, knowing they could save or sink her career. The pilot was so bad that Newman ordered it completely reshot, an almost unheard of expense for the cash-strapped BBC. Meanwhile, the Kennedy assassination meant hardly anyone saw the premiere. Most executives assumed Doctor Who would die quietly after a few episodes. Instead, when the Daleks finally appeared, they created a phenomenon that would outlive them all. The secret romance that changed everything. In 1979, something magical happened on the Doctor Who set that had nothing to do with time travel. Tom Baker, the wild-haired fourth Doctor at the height of his popularity, fell head over heels for his new co-star, Lalla Ward. She played Romana, a brilliant time lady who was the Doctor's intellectual equal. But what viewers saw as perfect on-screen chemistry was actually two people falling desperately in love behind the cameras. Their romance was passionate, intense, and visible to everyone on set. When they filmed the legendary City of Death in Paris, running hand in hand through the streets, it wasn't acting. It was two people drunk on love, playing out their fairy tale for millions to witness. Tom would later say, those were the happiest days of his life. The Doctor and Romana's relationship became the template for every future romantic subplot in the series. But passion that burns bright often burns out fast. By December 1980, they were married in a whirlwind ceremony at Chelsea Registry Office. 16 months later, it was over. The divorce was bitter, toxic, and played out in front of cast and crew who had to pretend everything was normal. The worst part? They still had to work together. Matthew Waterhouse, who played companion Adric, described the atmosphere as frosty and uncomfortable. Some days, Baker and Ward could barely look at each other. Their scenes together in stories like State of Decay crackle with real tension, the kind you can't fake. Their love story had given Doctor Who its greatest romantic chemistry, but their breakup poisoned the set and marked the beginning of the end for the Baker era. the producer who became the target. John Nathan Turner never meant to become the most controversial figure in Doctor Who history. When he took over as producer in 1980, he was just 33 years old, young, ambitious, and genuinely passionate about the show he'd worked on since 1969. JNT, as fans called him, was going to save Doctor Who from the declining ratings and chaotic production of the late Tom Baker era. At first, he seemed like the perfect choice. He completely refreshed the show's look, bringing it into the 1980s with new title sequences, electronic music, and a more scientific approach to storytelling. He cast Peter Davison as the Fifth Doctor, rejuvenating the series with youth and energy. Most importantly, he opened the doors to fans like no producer before him. JNT welcomed fanzine editors into the production office, attended conventions, and treated the fan community as partners rather than outsiders. But power corrupts, and absolute power over Doctor Who corrupted absolutely. Behind the scenes, disturbing stories began to emerge. JNT's relationship with assistant Gar. Downey raised eyebrows, particularly their interactions with young male fans. The allegations wouldn't surface publicly until decades later, but whispers followed them through convention circuits and BBC corridors. The tragedy of John Nathan Turner is that he became trapped by the very show he loved. When he wanted to leave after Peter Davison's departure, BBC executives essentially told him that if he quit, Doctor Who would be cancelled. So he stayed, growing increasingly bitter and paranoid, watching his creation slowly die while he remained powerless to save it. By the end, JNT wasn't the fans' producer anymore. He was their prisoner. The executive who declared war. Michael Grade didn't just dislike Doctor Who, he despised it with a passion that bordered on the personal. When he became controller of BBC One in 1984, he had the power to act on that hatred, and he used it without mercy. To Grade, Doctor Who represented everything wrong with the BBC: cheap, outdated, and embarrassing when compared to the slick American science fiction hitting cinema screens. It was garbage, he would later say without hesitation. Grade had seen Star Wars, Close Encounters, and E.T., and then had to watch cardboard things clonking across the floor trying to scare kids. He wasn't wrong about the production values, but his solution wasn't to improve them. It was to destroy the show entirely. Grade's war against Doctor Who was systematic and brutal. First came the budget cuts, forcing the production team to do more with less. Then came the schedule changes, moving the show from its traditional Saturday tea time slot to midweek, where it faced the ratings juggernaut of Coronation Street. When that didn't kill it, Grade played his trump card. In February 1985, he announced that Doctor Who was being put on hiatus, television speak for cancellation without using the word. The fan outcry was immediate and fierce, with letter-writing campaigns and newspaper headlines. Grade was unmoved. He'd already decided that Colin Baker was absolutely god-awful as the Doctor, and that producer John Nathan Turner had to go. The 18-month break nearly finished the show, but when it returned in 1986, Grade wasn't done. He fired Baker, slashed the season length, and moved it to an even worse time slot. By 1987, Grade had left the BBC for Channel 4, but his successor continued the execution. The final blow came quietly in 1989, not with fanfare, but with silence. Doctor Who simply wasn't recommissioned. The actors who paid the price. The cruelest dismissal in television history happened on a Tuesday evening in 1986. Colin Baker, the Sixth Doctor, was at home watching his final episode, The Ultimate Foe, when his phone rang. It wasn't the BBC calling, it was his lawyer, delivering the news that his contract wouldn't be renewed. After 18 months of defending the show through its darkest period, Baker learned he'd been fired the same way fans did, by watching it happen on screen. Baker's firing was just the most public humiliation in a decade full of them. The violence controversy had turned moral campaigner Mary Whitehouse into the show's most implacable enemy. Every week brought new complaints about the show being too frightening, too violent, too adult for its young audience. The actors bore the brunt of this criticism, with tabloid headlines calling them everything from sadistic to corrupting influences. Tom Baker's final years as the Doctor were marked by increasingly erratic behavior. His drinking was an open secret on set, and his relationship with Lalla Ward had created a toxic atmosphere that affected everyone. Matthew Waterhouse, barely 18 when he joined as Adric, found himself caught between two feuding stars who could barely speak to each other. The female companions faced their own horrors. Stories emerged years later of sexual harassment, of inappropriate comments, and unwanted advances that were dismissed as part of the job. Nicola Bryant, who played Perry, endured particularly cruel treatment, with producer John Nathan Turner making vindictive comments about her American accent and her figure. For the actors who brought joy to millions, the reality behind the cameras was often a nightmare. They'd signed up to be heroes, but instead found themselves trapped in a dying show, fighting battles they couldn't win against enemies they couldn't see. The fans who fought back. When Michael Grade announced Doctor Who's hiatus in February 1985, he probably expected a few angry letters. What he got instead was a fan uprising unlike anything the BBC had ever seen. Within days, organized campaigns sprang up across Britain and beyond. The Save Doctor Who movement wasn't just about saving a TV show. It was a declaration of war against corporate executives who thought they knew better than the audience. Jean Airy, a secretary from Wigan, became an unlikely general in this battle. She organized letter-writing campaigns that flooded Grade's office with thousands of pieces of mail daily. Fans marched outside Broadcasting House with banners reading "Bring Back the Doctor" and "Grade Must Go." The tabloids, sensing blood in the water, turned it into a David versus Goliath story that embarrassed the BBC leadership. But the fan community had a dark side that few outsiders saw. John Nathan Turner, despite being the target of much criticism, cultivated relationships with key fan leaders, using them as his personal army against critics. He would leak information to friendly fanzine editors, while freezing out those who dared question his decisions. Some fans became so invested in defending their producer that they turned vicious against fellow fans who disagreed. The conventions became battlegrounds where different factions of fandom clashed over the show's direction. JNT himself became a controversial figure at these events, with some fans worshiping him as the savior of Doctor Who, while others saw him as its destroyer. The producer fed off this attention, using fan adoration to validate decisions that even his own cast questioned. The tragedy is that the fans won the battle but lost the war. Their campaigns forced Grade to bring the show back in 1986, but it returned wounded with a reduced episode count and the worst time slot in its history. The fans had saved Doctor Who, but they couldn't save it from itself. The Death and Resurrection. Nobody knew that Survival, broadcast on December 6, 1989, would be the last Doctor Who story for 16 years. There was no fanfare, no special goodbye, just Sylvester McCoy's 7th Doctor walking into the distance with companion Ace, apparently heading toward more adventures that would never come. The end came not with a bang, but with bureaucratic silence. Behind the scenes, the writing had been on the wall for months. Ratings for the 26th season were catastrophic, starting at 3 million viewers and barely improving. Peter Cregeen, the BBC's head of series, made the final decision with cold efficiency. Doctor Who simply wouldn't be recommissioned. No official cancellation, no press release, just the quiet closing of the production office and the dismissal of staff who had devoted their careers to the show. John Nathan Turner, after a decade as producer, found himself unemployed and unemployable. His association with Doctor Who had made him toxic within the BBC hierarchy. The man who had once been the fans' savior was now seen as the undertaker who had buried their beloved show. He would produce just one more Doctor Who project, the embarrassing 1993 charity special Dimensions in Time, before fading into obscurity. For 16 years, Doctor Who existed only in novels, audio plays, and the dreams of fans who refused to let it die. The 1996 American TV movie starring Paul McGann offered brief hope, but its failure seemed to confirm what BBC executives had always believed, that Doctor Who was a relic of the past with no future. Then came Russell T. Davies, a lifelong fan who understood both the show's magic and its mistakes. When Doctor Who returned in 2005, it wasn't just resurrected, it was reborn, stronger and more popular than ever. The wilderness years were over, but the scars remained, reminders of how close Britain came to losing its most precious televisual export forever. The companions who were silenced. Behind every doctor stood a companion, usually a young woman whose job was to ask questions, get into trouble, and look good doing it. For decades, fans celebrated these characters as strong, independent women who could hold their own against Daleks and Cybermen, but the actresses who brought them to life were fighting a different kind of monster, one wearing a suit and carrying a clipboard. Louise Jameson thought she'd landed her dream job when she was cast as Alila in 1977. What she got instead was a costume that barely covered her body and a production team that treated her like a piece of decoration. The famous leather outfit wasn't her choice. It was designed by men, for men, with no regard for her comfort or dignity. During freezing location shoots, Jameson would be shivering in her skimpy costume while the male actors wore warm coats between takes. But Jameson found a way to fight back. In her final story, The Invasion of Time, she secretly had her hair cut short without telling the production team. It was a small act of rebellion, but it was hers. Years later, she revealed the truth. I wanted to reclaim something of myself from that character. Most heartbreaking of all, they were told to be grateful. After all, they were on television, they were famous. What more could they want? The answer, it turned out, was respect. The secrets are finally out. The heroes weren't always heroic, and the villains wore suits, not masks. Subscribe for more untold stories behind your favorite shows.